Now, welcome to part 2 of my story that will, in a way, both carry on the Star Wars sequel trilogy, or continue the journey of some of its characters, maybe I should say, while also sort of rewriting or undoing the story of the sequels as we know it at the same time. Or, as I like to put it, this is a story of how what comes next will change what came before. And if you're new to the story or you haven't seen the first part yet, I'd highly recommend starting with that. A link to it will be in the description below. And if you enjoy it, come back here for this part and then join us again every Tuesday or sometimes Wednesday for new episodes. Otherwise, if you skip that first one, what's going on here likely isn't going to make a whole lot of sense to you. Though that said, even if you have seen the first episode in the series, this particular part is going to be, shall we say, a bit different or a bit much, maybe. It's going full on into one of the stranger or perhaps more controversial things that's been introduced into the Star Wars canon. And it's the only episode or part of the story that will really do this, that may get a bit strange, you could say. It's pretty much otherwise going to be a straightforward and hopefully a fairly easy story to follow afterwards. I'm even planning on doing a separate video that will go deeper into some of my theories that I'll be using as a basis for the episode and really the whole series. In other words, this episode might be a bit strange at a certain point, especially if you are unfamiliar with these things or where they come from. But try to bear with me. The story will, in a way, simplify after this, and if you want to understand all this better, I'll have a video for you up in the next couple days, if not tomorrow. But anyway, without further ado, let's get back to the story. We start on the surface of a strange world, one where the sky above is a deep purple, and all we see are tall, gnarled-looking trees with ashen gray bark, and leaves that come in nearly every shade of red imaginable. And the last we saw him, he was jumping through what almost looked to be a portal of some kind on Tatooine. We now see lying unconscious under one of these trees, and surrounded by 3 soldiers, or perhaps commandos, all pointing blasters at him, is Finn. One of those commandos then gives Finn a quick kick to the midsection and barks at him, "Wake up, imp, get to your feet, and do it slowly." We then watch Finn's eyes shoot open, and instantly we see utter confusion there. And without even realizing what's going on around him, Finn quickly sits up, way too quickly for those commandos who jump slightly as their fingers move to the triggers of their rifles. "I said do it slowly, imp," the same commando from before then says. Finn glances around and only looks more confused than ever as he takes stock of his situation. He then says, "Imp, why do you keep calling me?" But before he can even finish saying that, one of the commandos yells out, "He's got a lightsaber!" All in a mere instant of time, we see Finn look at his hand where he still clutches the Skywalker saber from before, though it's no longer ignited. And in that same instant, we see him oh so briefly seem to contemplate activating it to defend himself. But that short inner debate ends with him either refusing to strike out against those he doesn't know, or he simply doesn't believe he'd have any chance anyway, and so he shuts his eyes and braces for the worst. In the next instant, then, we hear a voice call out from not too far away, one that almost sounds familiar to Finn somehow. "Hold your fire before he ends up like the other one," the voice says. The 3 commandos then slightly lower their weapons. Before that same voice says, "I said stand down, all of you." Finn then opens his eyes and watches as the 3 commandos lower their weapons further, all the while a 4th one approaches, one who seems to be the leader or commander of the group, as well as one that now almost looks oddly familiar to Finn somehow. When this new arrival is only a few paces away, he says, along with a motion of the head towards the lightsaber Finn still clutches, "Mind tossing that over here so no one has to get hurt?" Finn then does as instructed. He also then very slowly and carefully takes the other saber from his belt, that being Leia's saber, and tosses it at the feet of the 4th commando as well. That commando then bends over, picks up both sabers, and then hands them to one of the other commandos and says, "Tell Skywalker we got another one, another Force user it seems, though this one we captured alive." When Finn hears that name, he blurts out, "Skywalker? No, this really isn't something to bother her with, is it?" The commander gives him a curious look and says, Her who?" Finn replies, "Rey Skywalker." All the commandos exchange looks, and the leader of them says, "There's only one Skywalker that I know of, and his name ain't Rey, it's Luke." It's now Finn's turn to again look completely confused. "Luke? But he died at the Battle of Crate. I was there, I saw it. I saw the last stand against Kylo Ren. It inspired the entire galaxy to eventually fight back against the First Order." The lead commando shakes his head as if he doesn't comprehend anything he's hearing. The Battle of where against Kylo who and the what order? While both Finn and the lead commando are looking at the other like they're the crazy one of the other commandos speaks up and asks, "Sergeant Dameron, permission to knock some sense into this imp and take him back to the transport." Before the sergeant can even respond, it's Finn who says, "Dameron? Wait, like as in Poe Dameron?" Instantly the sergeant's face darkens and we see his hand fall to a blaster at his side as he takes a few quick steps towards Finn. Sergeant Dameron then says, "I don't know what dark side sorcery you used to pull my son's name from my head, but choose your next words very carefully or you'll end up like the other one." Finn, now looking more confused than ever, if even possible, says to the man standing before him who looks to be maybe in his late 20s or early 30s and does bear a striking resemblance to Poe Dameron, "Wait, are you telling me that Poe Dameron is your son, which would make you Kes Dameron his father?" The sergeant then says, "Careful." Finn shakes his head. Hey, I wouldn't think of hurting your son. Well, I mean, I wouldn't have until he sided with Rey or she started twisting his mind or whatever she did to him. The sergeant's look only darkens further and Finn says, "I'm going to stop talking about this and instead ask, where exactly am I?" It's then that the sound of blaster fire rings out as bolts begin to rain down upon them from all around. The 4 commandos and Finn instantly start to run for cover, but 2 of the commandos, including the one who was holding the 2 sabers, are hit and go down. Finn then pauses, sees the dropped sabers, picks them up and glances around just long enough to see stormtroopers, Imperial stormtroopers, making their way through the trees and towards their position. That's when Finn starts running in a different direction from Sergeant Dameron and the other surviving commando, and in the direction that the sergeant had first come from. To Finn's surprise, it doesn't seem like the stormtroopers are firing at him, maybe making the same mistake as the commandos and thinking him to be an Imperial. Not that Finn has yet made sense of how any Imperials at all are here, or how he just had a talk with Poe Dameron's father, Poe's father who looked even younger than Poe does. Soon enough, Finn comes across a parked vehicle, something like a small hover tank that bears the logo of the New Republic, and one that's maybe designed or suited for a half-dozen soldiers to ride around in. When he climbs in, he takes note of something, or more likely someone no longer living, under a black sheet in the back compartment area where the soldiers would normally ride around in. Shrugging it off, remembering something about the commandos talking about another one who didn't survive, we see an image flash in Finn's mind of the Falleen who dove through the portal shortly before him, and we figure that he figures that's who's under that sheet. The commandos did, after all, seem to refer to them as a Force user, or that Finn was another Force user that they were going to report to Skywalker. Some time then goes by, how much it's hard to say, but we see that the once deep purple sky is now completely black, which is when Finn hears a noise from behind him, almost like someone moaning or groaning in pain. Finn then brings the hover transport to a halt and slowly turns his head to see that whoever is under that sheet is apparently still alive, for they're moving underneath it. Taking hold of the Skywalker saber but not igniting it, Finn heads back there, keeping his eyes locked on the sheet, though it no longer moves and he no longer hears anything from underneath it. Taking a deep breath and shaking his head as if he knows this could be a bad idea that might not end well, he grabs the sheet and pulls it off all in one swift motion, fully expecting to find a Falleen Jedi apprentice of Rey Skywalker. But instead he finds a red-haired woman, maybe in her mid to late 20s, who is severely wounded or maybe even dead at this point. Finn then stares at her in silence for a long moment, until she again lets out a small groan and shifts ever so slightly, letting him know she is somehow still alive, which is when Finn springs into action, frantically looking all around for a medkit that he can maybe save her life with. That's when we're taken back to Tatooine, back to the moments after Finn jumped through the portal and it shut behind him, leaving Rey and an old, maybe 70 or 80-year-old Ezra Bridger locked in saber combat. And it's a battle that Ezra, though clearly quite skilled with a saber and still rather capable despite his age, is not doing so well in, and he finds himself quickly growing fatigued and in general is simply no match for Rey and her constant serpent-like attacks. Soon enough, and with a well-placed strike, Rey disarms Ezra and sends his saber a good 20 paces away, and the old man collapses to his knees before her, breathing heavily and hanging his head in exhaustion. She then says, her golden saber pointed at his head, "And now, after all this time, you will show me the way in." Very briefly then, we see an event from the past in the mind's eye of Rey, or perhaps I should say Palpatine. We see a place of infinite stars and strange constellations, one that can be traversed by winding and endless bridges of light that lead to many different circular portals. A place that can only be described as a world between the worlds, and in this place, again in the past, we see Palpatine trying to make his way in through one of these portals, while Ezra, when he was much, much younger, as well as Ahsoka Tano, are fleeing from him. Snapping back to the present then, Ezra looks up, and despite his labored breathing, he simply begins to laugh at her. It's a low murmur at first, but soon becomes loud and mocking before he says, You don't understand the first thing about that place. What you saw, what you tried to enter, you understand none of it. Ezra then falls silent and only smiles up at her in a way that all but says he'd rather die than say another word. And Rey does seem to consider that, killing him, that is. We can see it on her face, in her rage-filled eyes, and it no doubt takes a great deal of restraint to keep her from pulling her saber back and freeing Ezra's smug face, and the head that goes with it, from his shoulders. Ezra then, perhaps sensing her desire to kill him, and that all-consuming anger that goes with it, only laughs at her once again. But soon enough, Rey lowers the saber to her side and shakes her head. No, that's what you want, isn't it? You want to die and take all the secrets of that place with you. Ezra gives something like a one-shouldered shrug and then says, That's the difference between the Jedi and Sith. We find comfort in the great mystery, in knowing that we're only a small part of something so much bigger than ourselves. But you Sith, you can only find misery in it. You can't stand knowing how truly insignificant you are, and so you waste your lives afraid and chasing immortality, instead of simply enjoying what is. It's now Rey's turn to smirk as she says, And yet, after all this time, I endure. My hunt continues, and in the end I will become more than any Jedi or Sith ever has. But Ezra quickly shakes his head and replies, No. In the world between worlds, I've seen what your future brings countless times, Palpatine, for yourself and everyone else. Your ceaseless hunt for power and immortality will always end in the destruction of everything. It always ends with you sitting all alone on a throne of nothingness and ruling over a dead and empty galaxy. Rey is then quiet for a long moment, as if carefully considering Ezra's words, before she then says, So be it. Now show me the way in. Tell me how it all works. But Ezra falls silent again, and looks up at her with a little smirk on his face. That's when Rey reaches out her hand towards that face and makes almost a gripping or clawing motion with it, much like we've seen Kylo Ren do before, and we quickly see Ezra's face contort with pain. In a few seconds, almost reluctantly it seems, he begins saying, It's a fragile veil that exists between the living and cosmic force, a place that was once protected by a guardian and his children, a place they called Mortis. Rey seems intrigued and then asks, And what happened to this guardian of Mortis? When Ezra doesn't answer, she snarls and seems to dig even deeper into his mind. Soon Ezra is saying, As all things must, he eventually grew old and couldn't find a replacement before he died, and so Mortis was no more. Everything that it once was became shapeless, till I entered, that is, and it became that which I desired, a place to change what had happened, where I could save those I had lost, those I had loved. Became a place where I could change the past. With a great deal of effort, Ezra manages to stop himself from saying any more, but Rey mentally digs even further, and so he eventually says, But I soon realized that though it was a place of infinite possibilities, though the Force is always in motion, there can only be one reality, and the more that reality is changed or altered, the more it puts a strain on the veil between everything, and the more you risk shattering the veil. And if it breaks, nothing will hold back the cosmic force. It'll swallow up the living force. It'll consume everything. Everything we know that has ever been will no longer be. Rey then releases her mental hold on him and takes a step or two back and turns from him, and briefly locks eyes with Poe Dameron, who still stands nearby and seems amazed by everything he's hearing. It's clear Rey is deep in thought for some time, before finally saying over her shoulder to Ezra, And yet you've already sent Finn back, haven't you? And my apprentice has gone as well. Why have they not shattered the veil? If it's so fragile, Why have they not ended everything? Ezra, with every ounce of his strength, gets to his feet and then says, "Because the Force itself deemed you were supposed to die at the hands of Anakin Skywalker, destroying you is what it created the Chosen One for. His was a destiny set in stone, one that had to come to pass in order for others to be able to decide their own fate once more, free of your terrible control and influence. He was to bring a lasting balance." Ezra then takes a long, deep breath before continuing, "And so when you came back, that unnatural event alone nearly shattered the veil, and likely eventually will if you persist like the infection that you are. That's why the Force awakened in Finn and so many others, as a desperate attempt to stop you at any cost, to stop you who will eventually and inevitably lead to the destruction of all things." Ezra lets out another sigh and finishes, "Sending Finn back was a great risk, no doubt, but one that had to be made in order to stop the destruction you will bring." Rey then thinks quietly for a moment, and we can see in her eyes that her mind is racing, trying to process and weigh everything she's just learned. Suddenly she looks at Ezra again and says, "Where exactly have you sent him?" Ezra grins from ear to ear and says, "You're too late. He's already in the past, unwinding all you were never meant to do after your death at the hands of Anakin Skywalker." Looking furious, Rey moves back towards Ezra and reaches out towards his face again, ready to dig even deeper into his mind this time to try to control it if need be. "You will open a portal to him for me." Ezra, who's clearly in a great deal of pain, shakes his head defiantly. Rey again demands he open a portal, and soon enough, Ezra gives in and reaches out with his hand and extends a finger forward, and from his fingertip comes into being what can only be described as a black void, like a portal to nothingness. At first, a smile of pure joy and excitement crosses Rey's face, and it looks like she's about to jump on through without a second thought, but it quickly fades and morphs into a look of sheer anger as she continues to study the dark portal. No, this is a trick, it's a trap. If Finn has already gone back and succeeded, then things would have changed by now. They would have changed the moment my apprentice went through that portal, unless... Ezra averts his eyes as if trying to hide that she's stumbled upon some sort of truth, and so Rey smiles as she looks all around and says, "That flash from before, it wasn't you emerging from that place, but rather you somehow brought us all into the world between worlds. We're already inside." Ezra then lets out a quick, disappointed sigh and easily gets to his feet, as if everything, all his fatigue and pain, has been an act to get Rey, or Palpatine, to willingly walk through this dark portal he's created. The Tatooine landscape then fades away, and now the two of them, along with Poe, are in a dark place of infinite stars and walkways of light leading to portals for as far as the eye can see. They're all in the world between worlds. Rey then glares at the portal that Ezra seemed to create moments ago, for it still sits there open and leading to darkness. She then asks, "What lies beyond?" Ezra simply replies, "Oblivion, a final end for you." Rey faces Ezra and asks, "Why bring me here? Why not just send Finn back and change what once was, including my existence, my return?" Ezra seems reluctant to say at first, but finally confesses, "We were worried even that wouldn't put an end to you, that even if time and reality were reshaped and changed, you would still find a way to endure. We wanted to make sure that what you are was ended once and for all, and never would rise again." That causes Rey to smile, and then she says, "So, I have become something more than even the Force itself can contain." Then the smile fades as she thinks about what exactly Ezra has been saying, and repeats one word, "We?" Ezra can't help but grin, and Rey whirls around just in time to raise her gold saber to block the strikes from two white-bladed lightsabers, wielded by a rather time-worn-looking Ahsoka Tano. Ezra then pulls to him from a nearby walkway, his green lightsaber, and attacks as well. A brief battle ensues, one that it appears Rey might not be able to win against two seasoned veterans of the Force. And so she quickly makes her way over to Poe while he takes shots at both Ezra and Ahsoka that are easily deflected by them, but still enough to be a bit of a distraction for Rey to get away. And together, Poe and Rey make their way to a nearby portal, the first one they come across, besides the dark one to Oblivion, that is, and they jump on through. That's when Ahsoka quickly says, "We've failed. But Ezra shakes his head and says, maybe not. We're still here after all. If she had destroyed the veil by traveling back, we'd be... But Ezra never finishes those words. Instead, the stars around them quickly fade and everything, all the walkways and portals, go dark, swallowed up by something almost like a tangible or physical nothingness that quickly comes for them too. Ahsoka then reaches out her arms and hands as if to stop the darkness from consuming them, and to her amazement, it works. It holds it back as she begins to shimmer with a subtle white glow, a bird-like convor creature now appearing on her shoulder. The veil is shattered, it's all over, she cries out, in a voice not entirely her own, but one that seems to also contain the voice of the daughter of Mortis. We then focus on Ezra, who also holds out his arms and hands and seems to be able to keep the nothingness at bay, and we see that all around him is a sort of dark energy rippling across his body, and his eyes have an intense red glow to them. When he speaks, we can hear the voice of the son of Mortis within it, and he says, "It's not over, not as long as we can hold out and endure." She then responds, and this time it only sounds like Ahsoka, "But how long can we hold it back?" Ezra turns and looks at her, and gives a cocky little grin as he says in a voice that's just his own now, "Forever if need be." Ahsoka then gives him a small smile and responds with a single nod of the head as a look of resolve comes across her face, and she shuts her eyes. That's when we're back with Finn in the small transport on a strange world, where we see he has tended to the wounds of a young red-haired woman, and she's now slowly but surely starting to wake up, and once her eyes open, she quickly looks all around with them before settling them on Finn and asking, "Where am I?" Finn gives a little shrug and says, "I was kind of hoping you'd be able to tell me that." Wincing in pain, the young woman sits up and holds her side where there's a bandage covering a nasty blaster wound. She then says, after looking at Finn, "Who are you? You're clearly not with the New Republic, or you wouldn't be stupid enough to not have restrained me." Finn looks a little nervous upon hearing that and kind of jokes, "Hey, I was also stupid enough to save your life." But the woman quickly shakes her head and says, "It was the desire to fulfill the last commands of my master that kept me alive." Finn gives a skeptical shake of the head and says, "It may have kept you clinging on, but you weren't coming back from the brink without my help." But to that the red-haired woman snaps back, "My hatred for Skywalker would have brought me back." She then winces in a great deal of pain, her hand still over the bandaged wound. Rather reluctantly, she then says, "Perhaps you did play some small part in saving my life when those New Republic wretches would have let me just die." Finn then gives something like a content little grin before saying, "You said your hatred for Skywalker. Which exactly are you talking about?" She gives Finn a curious look and says, "There is only one Skywalker, Luke Skywalker." Finn sighs to himself and grumbles under his breath, "How did I know you were going to say that one?" The woman then quickly says, "What other Skywalker is there besides the long-since-dead Anakin Skywalker?" Finn kind of shrugs as if trying to play dumb and like he doesn't even know what he's talking about. He then says, "Speaking of names, I'm Finn, and you would be..." The woman hesitates a moment and then says, Mara Jade." Finn gives her a nod of the head as if to say, "Nice to meet you," and then he says, "Now, do you care to tell me where exactly we are? What world this is?" Mara responds, "Just another insignificant planet, though the one I'm hunting upon it is anything but insignificant." Finn then says, "The one you hunt, you mean Luke Skywalker is here?" She gives a slight shake of the head. "His time will come, but first I must find the child my master sent me after with his very last command." Finn then says, "And your master is who exactly?" To that she simply responds, "My master was Palpatine." And as soon as those words pass by her lips, and regardless of the pain and injuries, Mara springs to her feet with a lightsaber now in hand, one that she immediately ignites, and that lets loose a blue blade. Finn glances down at his belt and sees that, at some point, she must have got her hands on one of the sabers that he carries, on the Skywalker saber that once belonged to Luke Skywalker as well as to his father before him. Mara Jade then, very briefly, takes a closer look at the saber hilt in her hand, and it's almost like an odd sensation washes over her, as if some strange sense of familiarity grips her for a mere instant or two, or maybe something like déjà vu. Once it passes, she then says, "Now, Finn, is it?" Finn nods, and then she continues, "It's time for you to not only answer some of my questions, but to help me if you want to live." And that is where this part ends. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of this part of the story, or to tell me what you think will happen next. You can also be on the lookout for my video that will talk about things like Mortis, the world between worlds, and so on. That should be up in the coming days, if not tomorrow. Either way, do leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.